On this Friday night, preparing for protest. A truckers' convoy rolls into the nation's capital.
The demonstrations this weekend will be unique, fluid, risky, and significant.
The warning from police and the demands from protesters.
Every single person in that parliament resigns.
A new Omicron. What we know about the subvariant spreading rapidly around the world. The fast and the fearless.
You're going faster than you can drive your car, and you can do that at age 14.
Meet the Canadian teens going for gold in Beijing.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
We're here to free Canada.
This is not a fringe group.
Take a look at the fast-growing crowds in front of Parliament Hill, some of the first to arrive ahead of this weekend's protest against the government's vaccine rules. And many more are on their way. At least 6 separate convoys, more than 1,000 vehicles, according to police, coming from across the country. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ottawa police are asking residents to avoid downtown this weekend and to expect gridlock. The protest organizers are offering assurances that demonstration will be peaceful, but the police chief also had a stark warning to anyone who breaks the law. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, has been tracking all of those developments for us. David.
Well, Jeff, police are telling us today they're going to do everything they can to keep this peaceful this weekend. But police are anxious about what's to come.
The demonstrations this weekend will be unique, fluid, risky, and significant. These demonstrations are national in scope. They're massive in scale. Unfortunately, they are polarizing in nature.
Freedom! Freedom!
Those already here on Parliament Hill, well, they have any number of grievances.
Everybody, they only have 2 demands. And it's either Trudeau steps down or the mandates are lifted across Canada. We want love. That's why we're here. We want love and freedom for everybody.
Every time we turn around, there's another law or regulation. And we're just tired of being told what to do.
Every single person in that parliament resigns, or they end all of this narrative and drop it. That's what I want to see.
There are 6 convoys, each from different parts of the country. Some are already here, some are on the way. Police have been in close communication with convoy captains, all with the aim of a peaceful demonstration. But police are worried about parallel protests, counter-protests, and external actors going online and inciting violence. Meanwhile, some in the trucking industry are worried.
It's a little bit disheartening when these people are protesting the way they are.
And the protests themselves are disrupting supply chains.
It has the chance to give the industry a bad perspective.
And one of the big unknowns is how big this protest will get. Police say they know of 250 trucks that are here or are on the way, another 1,000 personal vehicles here or on the way, more than enough to shut down Parliament Hill.
Now, police stress time and time again that they really do not know how many trucks and people will come, how long they will stay, and most importantly, whether or not they'll remain peaceful. Jeff?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. The protest organizers say the convoy's substantial gas bill is being covered with the help of a GoFundMe campaign. More than $7 million has been raised in just 2 weeks. So far, more than 93,000 donations have been made, making it GoFundMe's top fundraiser in Canada right now. 8 of the top 15 donations are anonymous, including the largest of $25,000 made just yesterday. GoFundMe had put a hold on the funds until a clear plan for the money was presented, but the company now confirms that $1 million has been withdrawn, and GoFundMe says it will work with the organizers to release the rest of the money. And as that convoy condemns Canada's vaccine rules, Pope Francis is speaking out over his concerns about the spread of pandemic disinformation. Speaking today with Catholic media, the Pope condemned what he called the distortion of reality based on fear over COVID-19 vaccines. He added that access to accurate scientific information is a human right. The Pope's message comes as some Catholic media outlets have been shut down by social media giants such as Facebook for spreading COVID-19 disinformation. Federal health officials were asked for their thoughts about that convoy heading to Ottawa during a briefing this morning. And the health minister, attempting to use the convoy as an analogy, stressed that vaccinations are the best way to protect against COVID-19.
The convoy of which we should be speaking is a convoy of everyone being on board, knowing that the enemy is not vaccination, the enemy is COVID-19. And the best tool to fight this enemy is to be vaccinated.
Global News has confirmed that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is isolating because one of his children tested positive for COVID-19. The Prime Minister began his 5-day isolation period on Thursday. He says he feels fine and has tested negative. Canada's top doctor says it appears the Omicron-fueled fifth wave of the pandemic has peaked. Dr. Theresa Tam says average case counts dropped by 28% compared to last week. Wastewater surveillance and positivity rates are also trending down. But Tam says cases of severe illness and death are still rising. And there are growing concerns about that new subvariant of Omicron, which appears to be picking up speed. Here's Abigail Bimman on what you need to know about BA2.
BA2, another type of Omicron. No one is really surprised.
As long as the virus continues to multiply, new mutation will pop. Guaranteed. That is the lifestyle of the virus.
But this one is a subvariant. So what does that mean? The regular Omicron we've been dealing with is BA1.
You can kind of think of them as sisters in a family, that they're related to each other. They have a common parent that they both were derived from, but they're slightly different from each other.
BA2 has different mutations, and experts say we don't yet know enough about it. It's picking up speed in places like the UK, India, and Denmark, where it's the most dominant strain.
We've detected it since November.
Canada's top doctor says more than 100 cases have been identified here, and public health is monitoring closely.
International data suggests that it could potentially have an increased advantage on spread, but there doesn't seem to be any specific increase in hospitalizations or the severe outcomes.
It may be more subtle, but it needs to be watched, it needs to be studied.
The subvariant has picked up the nickname stealth Omicron, which this virologist calls misleading.
Calling it the stealth variant implies that it somehow acquired sneaky superpowers that it doesn't have.
If you have BA2, a PCR test will still tell you you're COVID positive. It's just not able to detect the specific subvariant. Sequencing is needed for that.
For most people, though, I don't think they really care which particular sublineage of the Omicron variant they're infected with, because it doesn't really change what they need to be doing next.
At Friday's briefing, Dr. Tam stressed that while we may have seen the peak of this wave across the country, coming down the other side still means many infections, and BA2 could be part of that descent. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Turning now to the crisis over Ukraine. The Pentagon says the buildup of Russian troops along Ukraine's border is unlike anything seen since the Cold War. The U.S. Secretary of Defense believes that President Vladimir Putin hasn't yet decided what to do next, and he's again urging the Kremlin to stand down.
He can order his troops away. He can choose dialogue and diplomacy. Whatever he decides, the United States will stand with our allies and partners.
Washington has stoked fears of an imminent invasion, but Kyiv is downplaying those concerns. Today, Ukraine's president spoke to reporters, including our Europe bureau chief, Crystal Goomansingh, about the situation in the country.
As Ukrainian soldiers tested their weapons, their president shot down criticism he's minimizing the threat of war to his people.
It's not that we're acting as if it's not the highest level of threat. We are getting prepared for the high threats, but we understand the reality that we are in.
Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is ready to defend itself should the Kremlin order its soldiers to move into Ukraine. And he urged Western countries not to create panic. When it comes to the threat of war, Russia again said it's not their country's objective.
If it depends on us, the Russian Federation, there will be no war.
A line Zelensky outright rejects.
They can do everything. They have a powerful army. Why do you need drills to happen specifically here?
It's not just Russian troops Ukraine is contending with. Can you share any information about any of those sort of physical or cyber attacks that have been identified or prevented?
So we have had quite a number of cyber attacks. We have prevented those, and we did manage to restore and recommission many websites of our government institutions. In terms of the physical attacks, I think our team is strong is that we can preemptively prevent, knowing that there could be casualties if we don't.
Western leaders are working to try to diffuse tensions. In a phone call Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin told France's Emmanuel Macron that the U.S. and NATO had not addressed Russia's key concerns.
We are working hard for the best peaceful political solution, but we're also prepared for the worst.
The Canadian government says it's doing what it can to support Ukraine. The defense minister is expected to travel to the country in the coming days. Jeff?
Crystal Goomansingh in Kiev, Ukraine. Thanks, Crystal. And coming up a little later, we'll examine the complicated history between Russia and Ukraine that led to this point, and the long road to recovery. An exclusive look inside COVID-19 rehabilitation hospitals. Well, take a look at this. A terrifying commute for drivers in Pittsburgh after a two-lane bridge collapsed today, injuring 10 people. Rescuers rappelled 46 meters and formed a human chain to reach those trapped in a bus at the bottom of the ravine. 5 other vehicles were involved, but incredibly, no one was killed. The snow-covered bridge buckled just hours before U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in Pittsburgh to promote his trillion-dollar infrastructure plan. He toured the scene this afternoon. A 2019 inspection of that bridge had warned it was in poor condition. Health officials are closely monitoring COVID-19 hospital admissions as a measure of the severity of the pandemic. But what that number doesn't capture are the patients discharged from acute care beds but who are still too sick to go home. They're sent instead to a rehabilitation hospital. On The New Reality this weekend, Carolyn Jarvis gains exclusive access inside those hospitals, and she joins us now with more. Carolyn.
Jeff, this isn't the front line, nor is it capturing headlines, but rehabilitation hospitals like this one are crucial in helping the sickest COVID patients get home. Here at Toronto Grace Health Centre, they've had to rewrite the playbook for a new type of patient. They've created an entire unit for patients who are on ventilators long term to ease the pressure off acute care hospitals. They've also hired 170 new staff, including those with ICU expertise. We spent months chronicling the journey of one patient here, Patty Romero, who nearly died of COVID. Through rehab, she relearned how to breathe on her own, eat again, and after 3 months, take her first steps again.
You're gonna go on 3. 1, 2, 3. Good. You're doing well, okay? We're right beside you. Not going anywhere, okay?
It's amazing. It's amazing. Tears of joy.
Tears of joy. Toronto Grace isn't the only rehab hospital of this kind. Across the country, there are many of them. But as one doctor said to us, these are the invisible patients of the pandemic.
I don't think that a lot of people understand what these rehabilitation hospitals do or that they even exist. It's the hospital you don't know until you need it.
And as we also learned, it takes a team of specialized healthcare professionals rallying behind a single patient to help them get home. Jeff?
Thanks, Carolyn. In her exclusive story, Carolyn will introduce us to 3 COVID rehab patients who share their raw stories of recovery. You can watch The New Reality this Saturday at 8 p.m. on Global. How did we get here? Just ahead, the long road that led to the current crisis over Ukraine. Welcome back. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia is complicated. Russians, like their leader Vladimir Putin, see many similarities between the two countries. But opinion polls show Ukrainians want to remain independent. Eric Sorensen has more on the history behind the current crisis.
This is the neighborliness Russia wants. Belarus, welcoming Russian troops, weapons, and the Russian defense minister. In Ukraine, troops prepare for the opposite purpose: to repel the Russian military. Just 40 kilometers from the Russian border in Kharkiv, Ukrainians are remarkably calm but defiant. No way, he'll leave, says this man. If he must, he will defend his city. Ukrainians view their history through the lens of Russian oppression under Stalin and others. For many Russians, the two countries are bound by culture, language, and geography. Vladimir Putin has called Russians and Ukrainians one people.
This is a myth that was created to support Russian imperial ambitions. They had to justify their claims to Ukrainian territory.
For most of the 20th century, Ukraine was the western bulwark of the Soviet Union. 15 republics led by Russia that made up the largest country in modern history. 7 Warsaw Pact nations in Eastern Europe provided a further buffer to the NATO countries in the West. But after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the Soviet republics became independent. The former Warsaw Pact broke apart. Those countries and 3 Soviet states in the Baltics have since joined NATO. Russia is determined not to let Ukraine be next.
The build-up of the United States and NATO's forces next to the Russian borders is of great concern.
Russia has always seen NATO as an organization that was formed with one purpose, which was to contain Russia.
In many ways, this is President Putin going back to address the outcome of the Cold War, to rewrite the rules of the European Security Order.
Returning Russia to its glory days depends on Ukraine and its strategic access to the Black Sea and to Europe. The takeover of Crimea and the incursion into eastern Ukraine in 2014 may have been a prelude to what's happening now, staging the Russian military in Belarus and along Ukraine's eastern border, prior to a possible invasion that could even encircle the capital Kyiv.
I believe Putin sees himself in the history books. Look at what happened with Belarus, with Kazakhstan. Now Ukraine is the biggest chunk and the most important part in this puzzle.
If Ukraine is the crucial piece of the puzzle, it's not the only piece. Other former Soviet states are watching and worrying, like Georgia.
The fate of Ukraine has a lot to actually say about the fate of other small nations in Eastern Europe, and particularly in the vicinity of Russia.
If Putin's aim is to ensure Russian security, its neighbors believe they will pay the price to achieve it. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Next, meet the young Canadian women looking to slide their way to a podium finish in Beijing. Canadian athletes have started arriving in Beijing for the Winter Games. 5 delegates were just placed in COVID protocol, though it's unclear if they tested positive. Despite all the extra pandemic restrictions and rules, some athletes say it's a dream they're not willing to give up. Mike Drolet spoke to 2 Canadian teens preparing to make their Olympic debut.
For the uninitiated, the luge run is 40 seconds of terror. Well, consider 18-year-old Natalie Corliss and her 19-year-old Canadian luge teammate Trinity Ellis among the initiated few speed demons who live for it.
It's nothing like you're ever going to experience anywhere else. You know, you're going faster than you can drive your car. And you can do that at age 14. So it's pretty cool to, tell your friends about.
They were around 10 years old and fearless when they picked up the sport, which probably explains why they're so nonplussed about the speeds.
Kind of at this point in my sliding career, it's almost, I would say, peaceful in some ways, which sounds kind of crazy because you're going 130 kilometers an hour.
Neither really remembers the Vancouver Olympics, but they still consider themselves children of those games because the only operating luge track in the country is in Whistler, which they now call home. Years of 2-a-day training sessions has led them to Beijing, where they'll be 2 of the 15 teenagers on a Canadian Olympic team with 215 athletes. The road to Beijing hasn't been easy, which is why even with pandemic restrictions, they never gave a second thought to not going.
Like, to me, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? It's a really big thing to turn down, and I have a lot of trust in, all the people in charge.
They're professional athletes, yet they're still teenagers who laugh when their friends jokingly mispronounce luger.
Yeah, all the time. Say more of my friends at home and stuff.
They're also eager and anxious to experience their first Olympics.
I cannot wait to just be able to open the bag, get to put on my stuff and say, like, this is it. I am here.
Of course they are. They're losers, spelled with a G, and they're winners. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Those losers sure look like winners. Looking forward to seeing them in action. That is Global National for this Friday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the Aurora Borealis over Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. There are beautiful spots all over Canada, so please email us yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.